to get started so Jim can have his full amount of time. Jim has presented on assessment a couple of times before in this VCE, and it's always a popular session. And I think we all struggle a little bit with how to assess whether students are learning what we're teaching them in a way that's meaningful and not just something that they'll flush and be worse off than they were the day before. So Jim really has some good ideas about how to do that and how to integrate it into the class in a way that's very creative and I think meaningful. Are you going to talk about our plan?
I am.
Okay, all right. He's going to talk about
I'm
our
going to
plan.
mention it. I'm
Okay,
going to mention
that's
it
good.
and try to get them involved in it.
That's good. Okay.
Kind of initially.
Good, because now they're a captive audience.
Yeah, they can't go. Lock the door. Lock the door. Well, thanks for coming out on a Friday afternoon. Thursday. I was hoping it was Friday, but it's not. It's Thursday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I really appreciate it. When I was asked to speak on assessment, that's always such, to me, just an overwhelming task. I mean, where do you start talking about assessment to people that assess all the time? And it's a very difficult task. So I was trying to figure out an angle to take today. And I'm going to talk basically about some interesting elements, I think, of summative assessments. I know we do a lot of formative assessments, but summative assessments seem to be the thing that have been of interest to me lately. I know in the past decade or so, I've rethought and thought about assessment. In fact, for this session, I went way back to 2010, which seems like a long time ago. I pulled up some old assessments and things, and I think I want to use them again. You know, I didn't realize how well. You may not think they're very good, but I'm going to give you a copy of those, and we're going to take a look at some of those assessments. But thinking about assessment, it's a big task. But I'd like to start our task with just a few minutes warm up. And what I'd like you to do, you don't have to write anything down, but I'd like you with the people next to you, just for a few minutes, I promise, I'd like you to tell me what you think are the characteristics of good assessment. And don't think about in your necessarily your specific domain, your specific area of expertise, but what do you think are the elements of good assessment, kind of meta assessment, the things that we all look for in a test, whether it's French or German or the sciences or whatever that is. So let's just take a few minutes, kind of relax, sip a cup of coffee, and see what you come up with. I'm going to listen to you. Oh, don't feel any pressure, believe me.
That they grasp the specific, not just the facts, but the critical thinking aspect of it, that they can reason it.
I was thinking of it more even from the student angle. Like, if I'm taking a test, I want it to be something that not just some kind of memorization thing. Yes, some kind of meaningful, like taking the material and putting it together in some way that really makes me think about it, and to make everything in class worthwhile. Like the people that work towards the test. If you go in and the test is just asking really easy surface things, then you think that's not really. The teacher doesn't even know how much I absorb or how much I know about the subject matter.
That's right.
And the people that are into the testing sort of thing, you want the teacher to know, like, or just having that validation, like I really did. I proved to myself that I know this material from different directions. Or just that what's most important was actually covered in the assessment, not just things that people might know.
That you test what you teach. That's what
Yeah.
I heard. I heard a presentation on that one time, testing what we teach, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, that they match up.
Well, and with the same kind of emphasis, like if you teach, it's a big concept and it's got all the stuff leading up to or whatever. what it is. I think I kind of struggle with that. Like, for example, if I'm covering a certain amount of material, I'm trying to make sure that what I think is more important is what I'm asking the most about. That's the most valuable thing in the test, not just, well, this is an easy question to ask.
To me, that's a big thing, you know, is that your test really shows the students what you think are important, and it teaches them what you think is important in your area. You know, so if you're testing trivial stuff, I mean, their idea of the specialty area that the course is about diminishes. You know, it diminishes the importance of it to them. I think if they don't see a real use for it, or it's important enough to think of some critically challenging questions about stuff like that. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I'm going to ask you to keep some of these things you talked about in your head. We're not going to do a follow-up right now, but we may, toward the end, ask what some of your conversations have produced. But, you know, I think about formative assessment because I think that's what we do a lot of in our classes. When I think about my own classes, we have to do formative testing, formative assessment. And assessment doesn't have to be an exam. Assessment doesn't have to be, you know, a 50-minute period, aside, you know, with no materials allowed, 50 minutes where they actually have to sit and do something. That's not necessarily an assessment that we'll be talking about today. But those are things that we do a lot. So it's difficult to talk about formative assessments in a group that is so varied. You know, when you're talking about music and you're talking about business and you're talking about sociology, formative assessments are very peculiar to areas of expertise. But it's in the summative testing where I think we have a lot of general things that we can actually talk about and address when we talk about what is a good test. Our summative assessments, we were just talking about this, I think, depend a lot on how we view the formative elements. In other words, however you do a summative test at the end of a unit, at the end of a semester, at the end of a learning chunk, however long that is, the way you design a test, the way I design a test, demonstrates to the student how important or unimportant the formative things they've been doing prior to the summative assessment. I think it is why when we assess, we have to link the end game, the goals of the course, to what we're actually doing in the testing. This is something that I've been trying to do more and more in recent years, and not always done a very good job at it. Been trying to do that more this semester, especially thinking about the QEP and using PathBright, which is a great format for keeping the goals in front of students, the goals of the course, and then assigning things that lead them toward accomplishing those goals that we've established for them in our syllabi. I know some people do not give exams. Some people do not give exams, but really we all give exams, because an exam, it's kind of a misnomer. An exam is that testing period, you know, that 50-minute testing period or 2-hour testing period at the end of a semester in which we, you know, let a student do what they can do with the material without any recourse to outside materials. And that's traditionally what we think of as an exam or an assessment. But assessments are much broader than that, and they happen much more frequently than that, even summative assessments. I do give exams, but exams do not have to be what we call these traditional exams. But one thing that I have come to realize, and I'd like to talk to you about today, is the fact that our students are learning, and it's this integrative learning book that you unfortunately made me read this summer. Now that's all I can think about is, you know, okay, I've got to redo everything I do so that it's integrative in nature. But it is true, our students are constantly learning things outside of our class, outside of our discipline. I mean, they're learning in your classes. My students are learning in your classes. They're learning at church, they're learning in their families, they're learning from their own reading, they're learning from online, they're learning from social media. There is a lot of learning going on in our students. Some of the good, some not so good maybe, but it's how to capture all the learning or the energy spent learning and integrate it somehow into our own areas of expertise. So what is a good assessment, and what is the purpose of an exam in the courses that I teach? I think what's good in a test is what motivates learners to actually learn. When a student comes to a test, is it seen as something that they are going to fail at, something that it's only going to show the teacher how bad I am at something, or something that I don't recall, or is it going to show them and be a learning experience for them to demonstrate something that they actually have accomplished that may not be that evident to the teacher? I've given both. I've given good exams and I've given bad exams. And I know when I give a bad exam because not that necessarily the students do bad on it, but I don't feel like it actually tested what they're able to do. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But good exams take time to create. You cannot create a good exam in an hour's time. I've created exams in an hour's time. I've been in a pinch and I had to sit down and write out some sort of assessment. But a really good summative assessment is not something that we can do in a short amount of time. And I've never, I don't think ever, I can't think of an instance where I've given exactly the same exam twice, even in the same course. Because when you do that, I think you don't take into account the changes that have occurred among the groups of students, the chemistry of the students, what you've covered, what you're not. And I don't think a test necessarily has to be over necessarily everything that you cover, but still there has to be a connection between the learning in the class and any summative assessments that you give. And I'm sorry if I have to look at my paper here, but I single space this instead of double space it, which is really bad. And I usually put really big type now when I write something on paper so I can see it very clearly. So I'm just trying to focus in here on a couple of the highlights. Would you mind holding it for me, or just kind of like a teleprompter? Okay, I'd be really good at that, I think. But to me, a bad exam, for example, and I think I gave a bad exam recently, was a collection of formative things that I had done prior to that exam. Quizzes or little checkups or prompts, for to check to see if students had memorized a verb conjugation. I'm going to talk a lot about foreign languages today because that's what I do. But this test, when I looked at it and after the students had taken it, I thought, really they've just done exactly what they've done the last few days, and they've even done probably these same items on their formative exams. So the summative, what I called a summative exam, had actually just turned into a collection of what they had done formatively, which is very disappointing to me, because a formative exam, you're testing to see if they've mastered the tools, if they have the tools of the trade. In foreign languages, and you've all taken foreign languages before, it's learning verb conjugations, it's learning what pronouns are, and direct object pronouns and that kind of thing. And those are the tools, and they have to know that. They have to know when to use subjunctives, when not to use subjunctives. But it's not so much do they know the tool, it's what can they do with that tool once they've mastered it, once they've shown formatively that they actually have a knowledge of that and the ability to use a tool. It's like me, if you know anything about me, I know nothing about doing repairs on anything. Okay, I have to watch a lot of YouTube videos, to fix a faucet. In fact, I've never even tried to fix a faucet because I know it would be a total disaster. The other day I backed into my garage door and I had to get someone else to come out and help me put it back together again because I just don't know how to do that. I have the toolbox at home. It's just that I don't know how to use them all to do specific tasks like I need to do. I know what they're good for and I know what you do with them, but I don't actually use them to do. Yes?
Does it depend on what year the class is for how much you're going to see how they can apply the tools?
I start that at the very beginning now. I do that in my most elementary classes, is I try to make their summative testing at the end of a learning chunk, however that long is, 2 weeks, 2 months or whatever. I try to make the test more than formative, but rather to have them use what they've learned, to do something meaningful with it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I just gave a test yesterday, for example, in which we learned the days of the week and we learned how to tell time and all of that in French. But on the test, it wasn't just what are the days of the week? List the days of the week, or how do you say this time in French? But it was actually putting together a schedule. They had to put together their schedule that they have at Lee University, put their schedule together, the days they have certain courses, and at the times those courses meet. So it's telling the time. It's using the things that they learned formatively, but it was in a meaningful way. And it's that element of making tests meaningful, or making exams or assessments, whatever we're going to call them, meaningful to them, and see that they are real life, these things that we ask them to do. And I think in a bad exam, I don't think the students, a bad result of a bad test is that students they miss the significance of what we're trying to teach in a course. if all our tests do are point out the formative, the tools of the thing. If they only see things done in isolation, like these isolated little formative tests that we plug together and make a summative exam out of it, they don't see the importance, I think, of what we teach as it integrates with other fields of learning. Now, this is not a rant against objective assessments, and I know I've done multiple choice, I've done fill in the blank, I've done true and false. I hate true and false. I hated true and false when I was a student. But because there was always that minutia of meaning, are they tricking me? They said this word, did they really mean something else? So I never liked true and false testing, though. It can be effective, especially in formative ways. But I think that our assessments should demonstrate to students the value of what we teach and the value of their time being spent in learning. One example of this is I have traveled on a number of occasions with groups of students to the Caribbean, the French Caribbean, to Europe, and I've taken students that score beautifully on formative tests. You teach a subjunctive for 6 weeks and then give them a test, A+, 100. But they land and they're walking in the streets of Paris or in the streets of Fort-de-France down in Martinique, and they couldn't open their mouth to say anything. They had the tools there. They knew that's happened to you, Donna. Oh yes, well yeah. Anyway, and they can't say anything, can't do anything with it, which to me is the perfect example of what I'm saying. Is if we concentrate a lot on formative exams and not summative exams, I think we end up students helping them to become like that. Now, I wanted to show you just a few samples of some things that I think are good summative assessments. And I hate to say they're good examples. They're not models by any means. I pulled these out of past tests that I've used in the past. It's kind of risky to do this. It's kind of letting someone see your underwear drawer, something equivalent to that, and I'm not sure. By the way, that's where they were last night. No. I don't know why I use that example, but I would be embarrassed for anybody to see my underwear drawer. I guess that's why. But I just made some copies of some interesting ways to turn formative testing into summative testing in languages. Now, this is in foreign languages, and so you'll have to make the applications to your specific areas of expertise. And I feel like I'm being very scattered here, but I think this will help us to focus in by looking at some of these examples. Again, these are not models, but I'm going to read through just a few of these, and I hope I'd like you to look for elements of integration of other learning that the students may have undergone, and how these samples represent going beyond just formative testing. All right, let's go. Number one. You are a group of local French teachers, this was given to my students, who have just been informed by the school board in your district that French is being eliminated from the curriculum. By the way, that is a very real life situation. And yes, unfortunately. Unless you can present a convincing argument as to why it should not be at the next board meeting. Each of you write an argument to present to the board after you discuss the issue with your fellow instructors. Only one of them will be selected to be the representative arguer. I don't know why argument, I have no idea what that is, but it was in an old test. And your task is, given what you know about la francophonie. This was in a course where we talked about la francophonie. La francophonie simply means the French-speaking world. And so it's a course in which we looked at not just France, but we looked at beyond Europe into Africa, into North America, into South America. And there's a country in South America where French is it's actually a part of France, and in Southeast Asia and the Middle East and places like that. What you know about la francophonie, its diversity, and its contributions to modern society, write an essay to convince the board and parents of the district that French is a relevant language and la francophonie essential to understanding of our nation and our world, and support your argument using the segments we've studied in your text, as well as related readings, blah, 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 blah. So in the course, we've done certain segments about this. What are the other areas here that you see integrated into this? Like, what would a student have to know to be effectively answer something like that, do you think?
First of all, the writing component of it.
Absolutely, the writing, right.
Geography.
They have to know geography, right.
Just thinking about the way the board and the parents are thinking and trying to, like, having an idea of the audience.
Yeah, it's a rhetoric. It's rhetoric that's involved there. You know, how to deal with a parent, how to persuade somebody delicately, you know, without turning them off, because you need them desperately not to be turned off with something like this. It involves education. I mean, it is the world of education that a lot of programs, a lot of foreign language programs are being cut because of funding and stuff like that. History, right? You've got the history, you've got music, maybe psychology, whatever those contributions from the French-speaking world have been, you would have to call in from previous knowledge and to be used. And students did respond in English to this prompt, because this was more about language, but it was more about their understanding of the French world and culture and things like that. Yes?
French is associated with social class.
It is. Do you know,
Educated.
when I started taking French, I started French at the age of 12. This is in 1985. No, it wasn't. It was much earlier than that. I was going to see if you were going to laugh. I knew you would. Thanks, Luann. Okay. But when I took French, French was the only language offered in our schools. We were surrounded by a community of Hispanics, surrounded by a community of Greeks. I lived in the Chicago area. There were more Greeks in that area than there were in Athens. The Serbians, but it was French that was taught in the schools because French was taught as a language. It was considered high class, high social class, and that's what the language taught in the schools. Yeah.
It started with French in first grade.
And it started with French. Yeah.
You can have in business too, because French is a big language.
A big language of business.
And
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. But anyway, that's one example, I think, of a summative question they could possibly use. Here's the next one. You've been appointed to head a committee of the OIF. The OIF is the International Organization of Francophonie. The committee is charged with publicizing the Francophonie in your region of the world. As possible chairperson of the committee, you're asked to write a 2-page draft of a working document. Here's the draft's purpose. You have to explain to the committee the purpose of the OIF and why in our region, for example, in Southeast Tennessee, the OIF is important. Now, it has become more important in recent years because we now have a French-American Chamber of Commerce in Chattanooga, by the way, which is becoming fairly active. Yeah, it's becoming fairly active, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, using things from the course, like 2 Francophone countries that we'd studied, to explain to your committee the justification for this project, and then close your document with a short discussion of why you feel your country should become part of the OIF. Because countries that do not have French as an official language can be part of this OIF, this organization. But notice in the evaluation of this, I don't give any points for French, even though this one is actually done in French. Because at this point, it's not their language, but it's the content of what they're doing that's important. By the time they get to this point, they have the tools that they need to accomplish something like this, albeit rusty, albeit not perfect. But what I want to get them away from is focusing on form and getting them to focus on content and to see that the tools they've learned formatively are things that they can actually use in a, okay, granted, maybe not real, but a close to real situation in life. Okay? Next one. We're going to skip the next one. We're going to go to the last page because I taught a literature class several years ago, and this is where I did a lot of experimenting with different types of questions and stuff, assessments, both oral and written. And this is from a book, Madame Bovary. Have any of you read Madame Bovary?
I'll be back up.
You may, please do.
This is a take-home?
Actually, this was it was a final exam. It was a 2-hour exam, and the students had a portion of that 2-hour exam where they could work collaboratively on developing a statement together. So it was not a take-home, but it was something that they had to do within a 2-hour period. Yes. And it could be a take-home. I think that'd be a great take-home exam. If it were a take-home exam, I might change it a little bit, but it wasn't in class, as I recall. Have any of you read Madame Bovary? Jose's read. Have you read it? Yeah, it's a great book about adultery and things like that. So. I hesitated to use it in our curriculum here, but I did. Okay, confession. But here's some of the sample things that I use on summative assessments for that course. One of them is if Flaubert had suddenly passed away after finishing the first 2 parts of Madame Bovary, before she died this long death due to arsenic poisoning, how would you have written it? And defend your choice of ending if different than the actual one written by Flaubert. I think this also is a good paper topic, and it's one that could effectively not do away with, but diminish the possibility of plagiarism. And those are kind of things that I try to think about too when creating an assignment that would be a take-home exam, for example, or a short paper assignment, is creating tasks or prompts that are unique to the course so that plagiarism is not an easy thing to do. Now, plagiarism in my domain is very easy to discover. When you have someone who is at the intermediate level French and they're writing like Pascal or writing like François Mitterrand, probably you need to check it. Okay, but that prompt I think was very effective in avoiding any copying or things like that. Anyway, the second one. Imagine that Flaubert, Chateaubriand, Hugo, and Balzac, these are 4 authors that we discovered that semester. We explored that semester. They're having dinner at your place. First, imagine how you would seat them, who would be next to whom, why, and then what are the major themes that they would discuss. What would be the tenor of the discussion in your opinion, and defend your answers to these questions as best you can from what you know about the writings of each. So it's more than just give me the date that this was written or who are the characters in the novel, but it's how would these authors, based on their writings, how would they interact with each other around an imagined topic or an imagined question. That was one of the most effective prompts that I've ever given. And I applaud myself for that one. Anyway, number 4, but it wasn't totally my idea. Number 4, and we'll go to number 4. Imagine that your choice of Madame Bovary for a university-level literature class, talk about reality here, you teach has been questioned by the parents of some of the students who reported that their children were being forced to read a novel about adultery, marital infidelity, and sexual immorality. Your presence has been requested at a meeting of the board of directors in Dr. Khan's office, by the way, I should have added, with plaintiffs present to give you the opportunity to defend this selection. And what would you say to them in defense of your selection? Give a brief speech stating and defending your decision. And this question, of course, goes directly to the integration of faith. I think to the integration of faith and learning. They still have to know the content of the novels, but they have to defend it based on faith. There are so many things that feed into a question like that made it a very, I think, effective assessment. And that would be an in-class essay assignment. I think that one could be an in-class, and it could be not. It could be a take-home as well. Think of a variety of ways you could do that. That could also be an oral assessment. That'd be a great oral assessment, I think. And oral assessments, I like to give a couple topics like that, have students think about both of them, and then come into class, and come into your office, and they don't know which one they're going to have to talk about, but you talk about that and make it interesting by throwing some interesting things into it. Yes. I did not. When I first gave this back in 2010, before I started steadily using rubrics, but I would develop a rubric for this now. Yeah. I did for something like this similar just recently, a writing assignment that I gave, and I distributed with the assignment itself the rubric that they would be evaluated by. To me, rubric assessment is so much more effective in the sense that it lets students in on what you're looking for in assignments. That has really improved assignments, basically, and I would definitely rubric this.
For them.
I'm sorry?
Take some of the guesswork out.
Oh, it does. It does. Especially some of these are pretty broad questions, how to narrow down exactly what is he looking for and that type of thing. But in none of these was their grammar and structure big parts of their grade. They were all much smaller parts of their grade. Now, early in the semester, when they were learning certain structural things in French, and that's when or they were reading novels, and I would assess them over the details in a novel with quizzes or oral quizzes or questions or group activities of some kind that you could readily assess them with. But by the time you get to, you've done all this, you read it all, I don't want to test them again over French. I think they know it well enough to handle these questions, and I'm more interested in what they know about the content of the thing, which is really great for them because they start writing these things. And I've had students say, I got so into that question. The time just got away from me. But that's what you want. You want to get them in a good summative assessment, away from thinking about language and more thinking about content, the content that they're writing about. And in world languages, that's a very important concept. This leads me to something I wanted to mention. While we still have a few minutes left here, Carolyn and I have been talking about since assessment across the campus is so different in different areas of expertise and knowledge, that we talked one day at lunch about starting a what do we call it? Not a repository. That sounds strange. Strangely like another word that I don't. But a repository, a bank of good tests that come from across campus that could be used as reference by teachers that come to us with less teaching experience, for example, or sometimes you're looking for a great idea, a great prompt, so you go to a test that Will gave or an assignment that he gave, some sort of a paper assignment or a quiz or whatever that is particularly good and that we can have access to see what other people are doing on campus. I think to me that would be very interesting, is to see what other people are doing and to learn from others, what they're doing as far as good summative testing is. So we were thinking about that in connection with PathBright, were we not? That's how it all started, I think. It's using PathBright kind of as the portfolio setup where we would collect all of these samples from across the different disciplines and have them available to faculty members. And I've asked Carolyn if I could ask you what you think about that.
Would you break it down by discipline so that it would be discipline specific?
I think
New faculty maybe coming in and something like that?
I think so, don't you?
We talked about
I think we talked about that, about keeping it discipline specific, but you could cross-discipline, of course, and I might get a good idea from a business assessment or something like that.
I think that'd be a really neat idea. I thought about that with rubrics before, like to see different people's rubrics.
Yeah, that would be good, I think. Yeah.
That's where I was looking for a good idea.
Yeah. So included in that would be rubrics and the testing itself. Yes.
In our in communication, we have a number of professional organizations, national organizations that publish syllabi and different helps. Although I think it's a good idea, but that may do what I think you're trying to do.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. Something like that. I wondered if we did something and particularly requested people to send samples of things that they do that integrate faith and learning. I think that is. Would those kind of things be found on another site?
I wonder if the CCCU reputation is that they're the Vatican of that kind of resource. I wonder if they've already done a lot of that.
I wonder if we could look into that. Yeah, see what already's out there. I haven't looked to see what's already out there as far as that, but we were just kind of shot this out thinking about PathBright and uses of the portfolio thing. Yeah.
You could also break it down by type of tests to demonstrate the different ways of offering tests.
Yeah. You mean not just on paper, but tests online, and again, assessment covers so many things. Assessment or tests or exams, whatever the word you want to use. It's so much more than just something on paper that students have to do in a 50-minute period. But it can be a video project. It can be. There are so many ways you can assess, and it does not have to be like this.
Offering online, I think, is going to be a challenge for a lot of faculty because, especially if you're not in the classroom, you have to be fairly confident of the exam and the student doing that work, that it's not someone else doing the work.
Yeah.
And I think we're moving to a point where some of us are going to have to maybe make a leap to say, all right, I'm going to try this. I know that I can't guarantee that this is maybe 100% the student's work, or how do we overcome something like, because we're being asked to more and more offer some online work. So if we test online, how do we know that it's that student's work? How can we be comfortable with that?
Well, this is the campus where Christ is King. Excuse me. So we shouldn't have to worry about those things, should we?
Just remember that the devil presented himself to the Lord.
He did, Bill. Yes, I stand convicted. Yes, you're absolutely right about that.
I don't think we can solve that problem, but I do think we could maybe peg some things like this is one that is especially designed to avoid plagiarism. I mean, if it's a multiple choice test and you're giving it online, you got to have retina scanning or something to ensure that that's the person. But as far as just the structure of the test, there are ways of making a question, as he did here, that kind of,
I know I've given some multiple choice exams online. And what I do is I shorten the time up to make sure that if they're not in sight, I know they don't have enough time to
You can time them.
thumb through a textbook
Mhm.
to look for answers, and to have the exam to randomly reorder questions so that maybe two students side by side couldn't be comparing answers or sharing answers. I mean, that's just some.
Yes, no, that's right. That's right. That's right. I've done some online testing too, and you know, you just severely, I guess, almost severely limit the time that they do. Some of these higher order thinking questions, though, are kind of tough to do online. You know, and but on the other hand, they're facilitated online because they can actually type their answer. You know, respond by typing and things like that, which is much easier for me than to sit down and handwrite something out anymore. Did you know I had students in my class that could not read cursive?
yeah, me too.
I was stunned.
That's interesting. My niece is 6 and she's learning cursive.
And she's learning cursive.
But she's in a Montessori school. So I don't know if it's-
But I wrote on the board the other day and said, what is that letter? And it was a Z, you know, a cursive Z. And they didn't know what it was. They said, I've never seen that before. Go, okay. Maybe we should forget French today. Let's just let's work on reading cursive. But they just don't teach it. They said they don't teach it at school. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I just have, I think it's a really good idea, but I know as a first-year professor, and it sounds like maybe that's what you're looking at is newer professors, maybe not even first year, but first year to lead, that it's something that I probably wouldn't access just because of time, and so maybe it's something more where, like you said, it's a bank, but where I can go to somebody and say, this is what I need, and that person can give it to me rather than me having to look through all.
To access it in a portfolio type thing. Yeah, that's a possibility. But I also see this for for you know, people that senior faculty, because I'm always looking for something different in an exam. You know, that's one area I hope I never get stilted in. Even though it's easy to do that, it's just easier to pull something else out that you've used before, change a word or two, and say, oh, it's a different test. But yeah, I'm always looking for new stuff, I think. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go back to your discussions at the beginning. So what is good assessment to you? What are the characteristics of good assessment? And I don't have the answer. There's no answer book here. But I think you might have some of the parts of it anyway. So,
One thing we sometimes forget is it needs to measure what your objectives set out is. Your objectives.
has to be linked to objectives.
The test at the end that's sort of over the content you've covered, but if you look back at your objectives, does it really measure the objectives you
Right.
had?
The behavioral objectives we put in the syllabi. Yeah. Yep.
In the methods class, I have the students complete a project that is a real-life project of developing a concert program, and they're using the tools they know about appropriateness of repertoire and how to place pieces within the program and transitions of choirs and it becomes, you know, quite a large project, but they're applying all those tools to what they will do in their job.
I like that. I like that.
I mean, we work toward that a lot throughout the whole semester, and it ends up to be a project that's due around Thanksgiving. And, it's real life. I do that a couple of times a year.
Do you see PathBright being useful for something like that? Or a portfolio system? Or
They do with their teaching, in the classroom or conducting or things of that nature.
But that's exactly right. I mean, it is something that it is real. They're going to use. It's something that they're actually going to have to do. Absolutely. Anything else? Good elements of good assessment.
Well, I think what you said about, it needs to be something that makes them think and not just to recall, not just regurgitate.
Yeah.
It takes them even a step further in their learning, so they know more when they finish the test than they did when they started taking it. It shouldn't be 50 minutes out of the learning process, but it should be the next step in the learning process.
Exactly.
I like that idea where they know more about their own knowledge too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
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 And their responses are gonna be individual. They're not all gonna be the same. They're gonna
That's
come
right.
through with different perspectives.
That's right. Because they all are learning in so many different ways than each other, even, in different venues and things. And so they should be, if they're being informed by those. Absolutely. I've been using something this semester called Talk Abroad, and it's an online program where they set people up. I showed Jose this the other day, where they actually set people up with people who live in Morocco or Algeria, French speakers around the world, and they sit and have a face-to-face conversation that's recorded, and then the recording comes to me after they're done with the recording. But I set up the prompts that I want the people that they're talking about to talk about. For example, our first one was on language differences within a country. For example, in Canada, there's this dialect called Joual that people speak in parts of Canada, and as opposed to just regular French or Canadian French. And so some of the students went on and they found someone from Quebec, and they actually were talking to somebody from Quebec, and the person from Quebec was saying, well, it's mainly old people that speak that dialect now, and it's not. But that's what I want. And students came back to me and they said, they said that's just mainly old people now that do that. I go, well, that's great. That's probably right. And touche. I'm glad you learned that. And they learned that from somebody through the language, but in an activity that was beyond, looking something up in a book or researching online or something. But it's kind of interesting. It's no, there's nothing wrong with that. No, nothing wrong with that. But it goes to this summative thing. Can they use the tools they have to actually get information and retain it and report it back and stuff like that? So, yeah. It's kind of interesting. It's been an interesting experiment. Yeah. Well, it's 15 minutes till. If you have nothing else to add, I will let everybody out at 15 till. Is that okay? We can.
You can have a cookie on your way out. And also, I have 2 copies of that book he was talking about.
It's
called. It's
strategies for blah, 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 blah.
something about. Well, it's right here.
I just remember integrative learning. It's actually the post-colon title.
It's leveraging the e-portfolio for integrative learning.
Yes.
It's not very long. I got a couple copies if you want to borrow a copy. It just kind of. It's really about integrative learning.
What's the book
Kind
we
of
read last year
lays
it's kind of
creating significant
significant,
learning
yeah.
experiences.
If you read that one, you'll see a lot of repetition in this book,
This
but
one
it's
just tells
good.
you how to use the e-portfolio.
In the portfolio, yeah. That's a major difference.
Pathbright? What's an e-portfolio?
Pathbright.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Pathbright system that we're starting to use now on campus. And that's very interesting. When you go on Pathbright, and back to this, it's the linking of your objectives to the activity that you're doing that the students see when they pull up the activity. That I'm doing this reflection with this goal in mind. And then, of course, it's got the rubrics. I mean, they pull the rubrics up online and everything and see what they're going to be evaluated on. It's really kind of interesting. I'm just experimenting with it this year.
I want to say one last thing.
Oh, please do.
I usually when I give the first test, if they don't do well, I give them an opportunity to get some points back if they'll write an assessment of why they didn't do well. So they didn't study, or they didn't understand the terminology, or
Okay.
whatever. So I usually give it to people who did really badly, but this time I gave it to the whole class, that opportunity, and it was really interesting because it's kind of like the silver medalists at the Olympics. The people who got B's were the ones who were most into it. They were really going to do this and really analyze why they didn't study or what went wrong with the whole process. So I think making them more introspective about their own learning is a good thing.
To focus on the process. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's very good. I think that too. Kind of I'll give them half their points back if they sit down with somebody and go through
Go
the
over the
test and
test.
see what they did wrong and stuff like that. And it's always the B's and the A's. Well, but if they get extra points, why can't I? Because I usually say, well, you can't get more than 80 points,
Right.
But that's not fair. I want to get 85 instead of 82. But
I got an 86. I never get B's.
you're kind of missing the point of it. But anyway, yeah.
Anyway.
But it's fun. It's fun to do assessments that are different. Group assessments, pair assessments. I give tests sometimes and let 2 people take the same test together.
You match
And
them
do
up?
stuff like that. Sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes I do. Not always, but I do. Yeah. Or a group assessment, a problem they have to figure out in a group and use the material we've studied and then present a draft retort or rebuttal or something to a problem. Yeah. And they learn a lot from each other, and I learn a lot from them. Some of those experiences. So, thank you very much for coming out, and
Jim,
I appreciate it.
Do you read